probably more so than many others. Where do you see that now? We talked about what El Salvador did this week, but it speaks to all of the issues that you're dealing with here, which is what are real rates? What's the value of money?
So that's a tricky subject. So first of all, I'll say the first thing I will say on crypto, people describe it as a hedge or an alternative. I'm not sure it's a really great hedge. I mean, the correlation to equities, the correlation to risk assets, I'm not sure it's a great hedge. By the way, when an asset moves 10 to 15% a day, really hard to hedge big organic asset pools with that as a hedge. Is it an alternative currency? Listen, I've said it with you, Andrew. Listen, part of why I own a small piece of Bitcoin is I do think there are more people that are going to enter that fray over time. We have a very moderate position in our portfolio. I like, quite frankly, are volatile that have upside convexity. And I could see Bitcoin like it's done. I could see it go up significantly. But listen, I think it's volatile. I don't think it's a core asset class like bonds are or like stocks are. But I think it's, to have a bit as more of a speculative tool in a portfolio. Yeah, I think there's some value to that.
Before I let you
Happy Bitcoin Tuesday, freaks. It's your boy, Matt Odell, here for another Citadel Dispatch, the interactive live show about Bitcoin, distributed systems, privacy, and open source software. We got a great show lined up here. I'm very excited for it. To the freaks that are joining us after the fact through the audio, that was Rick Ryder on CNBC. He's the managing director of BlackRock. They have $2.4 trillion worth of assets under management. And he likes to dabble in Bitcoin. This is Citadel Dispatch 38. The focus will be on mining and improving your mining setup. This is a natural follow-up to Citadel Dispatch 31, which you can find citadeldispatch.com/CD31, which was our first mining-focused panel. And this one is basically going to be improving your setup from there. So we won't start with the basics. We're going to go from basically where that left off. Before we get started, huge shout out as always to the Ride or Die freaks in the live chat, whether that's through Twitch, YouTube, or Twitter. You guys make this show special. You guys make Bitcoin Tuesday special. So thank you again for joining us. And also shout out to all the freaks who support the show. Keep it ad free and sponsor free. I appreciate you guys tremendously. Really thank you for the support. It means a lot. So let's just dive into this. I mean, we got a massive panel here. I couldn't help myself. We just got so many great voices in Bitcoin mining that were willing to join us for this conversation. So I couldn't say no. First and foremost, we have Big Kahuna. We actually have two guys from Brains. We have Big Kahuna. How's it going, Big Kahuna?
Doing all right. How you doing?
He works at Brains. Man of many hats. We have Jonathan Coin Heated.
Hello.
Big focus on immersion mining. How's it going, Jonathan?
Awesome. Glad to be here.
We got Marty Bent, my co-host at Rabbit Hole Recap, his first time on Citadel Dispatch, man behind Great American Mining. How's it going, Marty?
It's going great, Matt. Thank you for having me. It's fun to finally be on the Citadel Dispatch side of things.
Yeah, it's truly a pleasure. I mean, I tried to get your dad, but we'll it's fine that we got the son instead. We also have Jan, co-founder of Brains. How's it going, Jan?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me here.
We have Brett from Upstream Data. How's it going, Brett?
Hey, how's it going, Adele?
We got Neil Ronan Miner. He's a return guest. He was on Citadel Dispatch 31. He's probably like 3 claws deep. How's it going, Neil?
3 claws deep, man. It's going.
Did I nail it? Are you 3 claws deep?
Nailed it.
There we go. There we go. So the focus of today will be on improving your Bitcoin mining setup. We have 2 main topics to discuss. upgrading your firmware, specifically to Brains OS. That's why we got 2 Brains guys here. And also immersion mining, which is, putting your miners, liquid cooling them instead of air cooling them. But we will also be talking about all things mining. Feel free to put your questions in the live chat, as always, if you'd like to get them answered. If we don't answer them right away, I will be writing down any ones that are good and we'll come back to them. With all that said, I think Big Kuna wants to start us off with some history. So why don't we start there?
Yeah, I thought we were going to be a little bit classy and not even drop the Brains OS firmware shill, but I guess we're starting off right with that. Anyways, yeah. So Matt, you like to talk a lot about how you buy phones and flash your own custom firmware on that, and I think that's very very useful when you think about firmware for miners, because you buy these phones and you own all the rights to them. You can do whatever you want with them. You can run them over with your truck if you want to. I guess the only thing you sacrifice when you flash custom firmware on there is that you might void the warranty, but for all intents and purposes, you own everything about that phone. And the same thing goes for these mining hardware that you buy from all these manufacturers. You buy the hardware and it's shipped to you, and you're kind of just forced to trust that what's on there is sufficient. What firmware they put on there is trustworthy, and they're not doing anything sketchy with that. And so, I mean, that kind of goes with the ethos of Bitcoin, where we're supposed to validate our own keys, our private keys, run our own nodes, so that we can make sure no one's screwing us over. Don't trust verify, and that there should be an option with that with miners as well. And for the longest time, when these ASICs started coming out, there really wasn't an option for that until I guess there was 2 instances where these manufacturers kind of breached the trust of their customers. There was something called AmpLead that came out with one of the manufacturers, and if you guys don't know what AmpLead is, what this is it was found out that one of the manufacturers had a backdoor in their firmware, and what this allowed them to do was pretty much anything. They could access your hardware remotely and shut it off, redirect the hash. They could do all this nefarious stuff with it, and that's absolutely terrifying, because when ASICs first came out, there wasn't any competition out there. So they really cornered the market. They could have really hurt the integrity of the Bitcoin network, not just from the miners, but all the users as well. If they were to implement anything or do anything nefarious with that backdoor, then that really would have screwed over the entire network. Probably would have set us back a few years. So that's kind of the first instance. The other one was Covert ASIC Boost. The same manufacturer, essentially what happened was 2 researchers found that there was a way to restructure, do something fancy with the block header to improve the efficiency of mining chips. And it was suspected that the manufacturer had implemented this in their chips. And we found out that they were using this at home, but when they shipped the product out to their customers, they would retract this. They would use ASIC Boost for themselves, and then they would eliminate it when they sold it to their customers, so that they always had a competitive edge versus the rest of the network. So those are just like 2 real life stories of things that have happened with these hardwares that really made it necessary to have an open source firmware or have other competition out there. And when you look at the market today, you have a couple different manufacturers that are all competing with each other, challenging each other, making each other better. And now you have custom firmware like Brains OS, where you can take this hardware, flash your own firmware on it, and you get a lot of pros out of doing that. There are some cons, but it's mostly pros. And this also adds just more and more competition to these hardware manufacturers to improve their setup and whatnot. that was kind of the history lesson I wanted to go through, because I think that's a really great introduction for this conversation as we go into some of the pros and cons of this stuff and how custom firmware can improve your setup.
Both of those examples you gave were Bitmain focused, amp lead and covert ASIC boost. Is that part of the reason why your firmware currently only supports Bitmain ASICs and not WhatsMiner? Is that why the focus started there?
I mean, I think Han can speak to this a little bit more, but that was specifically why they started with we started with the Dragon Mints, but that's why we put a lot of our focus in the S9s.
About the Dragon Mints.
Yeah, so literally the first firmware supported in BrainSOS was Dragon Mints, but by the time we were publishing the first version, we thought that the most popular miner out there is S9, and it was actually, at that time, it was still possible to download the CG miner sources that supported S9s without ASIC boost, and we could have based our firmware off of this, providing the rest of the operating system from general open source. So that was the beginning of the story. But I think the manufacturer with time realized that they can tighten the screws a bit more. And I think with the upcoming generations, I can't tell exactly which version, but I think the S9 was really the very last one where you could download bits and pieces of the source code. And if you had enough engineering skills, so it was not like a simple job of just executing a single script and you would have an image that you can run on your own. You would be able to have your own firmware for the S9s at that time, which I found it's okay, but at the same time, it's kind of already a violation of the GPL because there are a lot of components to the firmware, not just the CG miner software. And in the upcoming generation, I think that was probably S11, S15. They didn't even bother to publish a single piece. But I mean, I didn't do the research at that time because we skipped these generations because I think they released only a small batches of machines, and the next major generation, which was not very successful, was the X17s. Where this was the case, just you would get like nothing about the machine that you bought, and now with the X19s is getting even worse, where there's a new super great feature called Secure Boot, which pretty much prevents running an alternative firmware in a standard way, because the whole boot chain from the ROM loader is secured, so it does an RSA key check, and you can tell that Bitmain is currently not really willing to sign third-party firmwares.
So are you out of luck, or did you figure out a way around it?
That is difficult to answer, because we have a way around it, but the problem is that it is a hassle, right? You buy a machine that you think you own it, so you think you can do anything you want with it, like you do with your cell phone, but that's not the case anymore. You have a bunch of alternatives. You can swap out the control boards, because, for example, the control boards on X19s are the same as on X17s. So if you're lucky, you can just switch it. But if you're a big farm with a lot of machines, this is a costly operation. You can exchange the CPU on the control board because this one is unusable. It has the OTP. One-time programmable registers or fuses. That's what they're called, eFuse. They are burned, basically, saying this is the public key that needs to be used in order to boot the next stage bootloader, and that pretty much is game over for booting something alternative on the original control board. So your mileage may vary depending on like how much effort you put out in order to run alternative firmware.
So Jan, while I have you, when WhatsMiner?
That's when we drop off, right?
2 weeks, 2 months, trademark.
2 weeks, the famous 2 weeks. I'm still waiting for my Butterfly Labs in 2 weeks.
Oh yeah. No, it's really so the current roadmap is that we have a private beta testing of X19, and what comes after that are the WhatsMiners. And I mean,
Awesome.
the Watts miners are already being tested, so it's not that you're starting the implementation. The Watts miners are in the
And-
test process.
And then I guess for both you and Big Kahuna, so there's two versions of Brains OS. Are what's the difference? Are they both open source, or is only the basic one open source?
There's the Brands OS is open source, and then Brands OS Plus is closed source because we add an additional feature in there called auto tuning, and auto tuning is kind of the way that we make a little bit of money off this. What it does is it takes every single chip on each of the hash boards and optimizes the performance that you get out of those. So you imagine you buy a miner from a manufacturer and they want to sell it as a specific number. You get an S9, at 1400 watts, it gives you 13.5 terahash. But if you take and you tune each of the chips on there, you can gain 0.1, 0.2% efficiencies out of every single one. And since there's hundreds of chips in there, you can geek out up to 25% efficiency gains. So that auto tuning feature is the only thing that isn't open source.
And does that have a cost attached to it, or are they both free as in free lunch?
So the open source version is free. The way that the auto tuning or the closed source version works is we charge you a 2% fee. So your hash just gets donated to us as a dev fee. And it's kind of a win-win because you get up to a 25% efficiency gain, which will cover that cost. But then we're also making a little bit more because that 2% is a larger piece of pie. And then if you use Slush Pool on top of that, then we waive the pool fee. So in most cases, you're getting the same exact fee overall, but a higher performance.
So you just answered my next question. You don't have to use Slush Pool.
You do not have to use Slush Pool, but if you don't, then you will also be charged the fee of the pool, which is not a lot, but it's it's an incentive to work with us.
And why not use the best pool available?
Obviously.
So let's bring everyone else in. Does anyone here actually use Brains OS? I'm pretty sure Brett does.
Yep.
I'm
I use
exclusively Brains.
Let's go.
I don't currently, but when I had S9, because I really only run Watts miners right now, but I mean, I always had Brains OS on my S9s, and I mean, the efficiency gains, or at least the terahash gains, I guess I didn't monitor the efficiency that well, but the terahash gains were insane. Easily 25%.
Yeah, I got my first S9 and just with stock firmware, figuring out what on earth I was doing. Then I found the open source stuff. I love open source. And then got Brains loaded on there. And with the exception of the S19s I have, I run nothing but Brains stuff.
Yeah, basically same thing with us. I actually constantly am shilling Brains OS because I love the firmware. Ever since I found out about Brains OS Plus, it's basically just been if we can get miners that can support Brains OS Plus, we should be running them all the time because the efficiency gains are awesome, the overall terahash gains are awesome, and for us in the specific way that we're doing things, as in putting out basically data centers for clients. We also need to be able to change the wattage on each and every single one of these units. So we can have units that range anywhere from 90 kilowatts up to almost a megawatt. And so if we're, say, running too hot or we're using up too much power off the engine, the nice thing about Brains OS is we just pick a wattage, we drop every miner down to that wattage, and we're good to go. We can reduce load on everything, which makes it really nice.
Yeah, and that range that you get is awesome. Going down to a half or a third of stock and well beyond, that range to work with is just awesome.
And you can also make the argument by making these things more profitable that you're extending the lifetime of the hardware. Like S9s, I think Brains actually did some nonce data scouring and found that something like 25% of network hash rate is still S9s. How much how many of those machines are still running because they're running brains, which makes them still profitable. That's like another interesting variable to think about here.
Marty, do you guys at Great American exclusively run What's Miner?
As of right now, yeah, we're not opposed to Bitmain. I mean, we did have a chunk of Bitmain S9s, and when we ran those, when we tested those, I believe we ran brains on those as well. But right now, yeah, we're just all of our containers are packed with What's Miners as of right now.
Brett, you guys are the opposite, right? At Upstream, are you purely Bitmain?
We pretty much stick to S9s, unless like a client says, hey, we have our own miners or we want this specifically. We just say like get S9s, because again, you're running on free power. There's no point in running like a brand new S19. And this is what I tell people. It's like, why would you buy a brand new like $10,000-$15,000 computer and then put it out in a dirty, dusty like hole in the ground in the middle of nowhere and get it wrecked? Like there's just no point.
Well,
especially on free
oil
power.
First.
Sorry?
So, well, if you throw in an oil tank first, then we'll get to that.
Yep. Immersion. Another thing BrainsOS is great for, because it lets you control the fans and shut them all off.
Yep.
So I do have a question. Was there any validity to the argument, or I don't know if it was even an argument or if it was just people shouting on Twitter, but they were thinking that the BrainsOS was burning up their hashing boards, or there was too much power going to them or something. People were claiming that for a little while. I don't know if it was they were overclocking them, or I'm authentically curious about that. Did you ever see that?
You get a lot of extra features when you use custom firmware. Like, I guess when you use What's Miner or Antminer's stock firmware, you're very limited to use it how they want you to use it. And when you use a custom firmware like Brains, you do get to unlock a lot of potential in the miners, and that does allow you to overclock, underclock, mess with the temperature settings and everything. And I'm sure John can talk in great depth about this, but I think that there are cases where people do hurt their own machines. But by default, it's set up to be, very safe. And then it's kind of at your own risk to mess with the settings.
Yeah, you start pushing the buttons and turning the dials. Yeah, and I never messed with any of that, so I never actually personally with any of the S9s that I was running it on, I never had problems with it. But I don't know. I saw people talking about it, and I was like, well, what are you doing that's goofy with it? But
it's the same idea as what you mentioned earlier, Kahuna, with like your own phone. Like you can flash custom firmware on your phone, but if you brick your phone in doing that, or you mess something up, like that's kind of on you. There's so much support out there for something like BrainsOS. Like there's tons of people out there willing to help with that. But I think it's just people making possibly bad decisions about how much power they should be putting into their chips, because you can, like, from what I've seen, BrainsOS stays the most efficient around 900 to 1200 watts, which is actually lower than like what Bitmain would initially put in. I think they put in something like 1300. And so again, Jan Kapek from Brains might have to speak more on this, because I think he knows more about this than I do. But I think it's really just based on people making their own decisions with their chips, and you have to be smart about it, right?
Oh, for sure. So I've taken an S9 with Brains in oil up to 2400 watts. And you could never do that on one, on stock firmware, and two, on air. You have to disable the stuff, and if you do that, if you uncheck the disables, uncheck this, and of course, you can push it well beyond to the point of frying it. And if you go beyond if you go beyond the stock limitations, then you're into a territory of wasn't designed for that specifically. It might happen.
What I want to know is, how much hash rate did you get out of that, baby?
Yeah, it was. I want to say it was 20 something. It was ridiculous. And I ran it for a couple of days that way. It was just plugging along at 2400. It was the most I could set it to in Brains at the time, I think.
Oh my God.
And I did a S17. So I used a stock power supply. I disabled one card.
You should give the listeners like a base on how that machine is supposed to run before you go into how much you geeked out of it.
Right. So on a S17, stock for 3 cards is around. I think it's 3,040 watts. And so the specific one I had was a 76T. And so that would be stock. So it's about 1,000 watts per card, and about 25 terahash per card. So I decided, like, you know what, I want to see what these things can really do. And so in a isolated tank, I put one miner in an oil tank and on its own radiator, and disabled one card because Brains will. You get a maximum power total, and then it divides it across the 3 cards. So I just kept running it up and up and up, and I ended up getting to 4850, which I think it divided it out then into like 1,600 some odd watts per card, and I ended up at it was like 38 terahash per card. If it was all 4 cards, it would have been 104 terahash. So it was almost a 50% increase.
Out of an S17. That's insane.
Yeah, out of an S17. And I think there was still room to go, but with 2 cards power, that gets close. You know, that was like at 3,300 watts, which is beyond the stock limit of that power supply. So, and I tried it with even just a single card, and I didn't get it much further past that. I think I got to and at 5,000 is where the Brains is capped, and I'm sure it's just a logical barrier, not a technical barrier. So people don't try and do it air cooled and put it to 5,000 watts and cry when their miner catches fire.
Or their house catches fire. Yeah, that's
that too.
Just a short comment. You're perfectly right, because the current limit on the next gen machines, even starting with X17s, I want to say that the X17s, when they're immersed and never ran on air cooling, then they behave quite well because they don't disorder. But they must have never been run with air cooling. Then you can get really good numbers like you mentioned. And I think it is possible to go even beyond. We have raised the frequency limits a bit with the upcoming release again. So the only limitation is really how you're gonna allocate your hash boards. And one idea that I had is basically just starting harvesting the 3rd card and basically building a spare miner in the container. So basically every 2 miners you get another miner. You just need an extra power supply and a control board. Yeah.
I really like that idea. That's something that we're going to have to look into at some point, because that's.
I personally, we're testing a lot with immersion, and I found it very logical if we don't have a large facility for mining ourselves, because writing the firmware is slightly different sport than running like big mining, but we have some testing facility. And this is what we do when we want to test the maximum limits, and we never count on 3 cards. But I mentioned it to one of our customers, and they were kind of like surprised, saying, "Oh, well, that's interesting. We never thought about this." But I think it's an economical way how to scale your operation, because if the efficiency numbers work out for you, it is expected that you will not be running at 38 joules per terahash. That's not going to happen. But you'll probably land somewhere around 40, 44, 45. And that is, I think, considering the current difficulty and exchange rate, most operations would be profitable. And what matters is to get as many coins as possible, right?
Do you have any subways over there? You can expand your operation. Like Subway restaurants?
Okay.
It's time about taking over the empty spaces from COVID.
Yeah.
I don't think there's just one Subway in Prague, I think. I should check if it's still open.
I guess to go down the immersion thing a little bit more, for the listeners, the You've heard a lot of bad things about these S17s and them just failing. Them being an unreliable hardware, and we're kind of to a point where if the hardware's already failed, it's gone. But the main issue is that when they designed it, they just didn't design it to cool well enough. So, Jonathan's been able to fix a lot of this with his immersion testing, because that gives it like perfect cooling, and that really allows you to strain the setup. Yeah, Matt just pulled up a video of Jonathan's garage if you wanted to talk through it or something.
Yeah, sure. So, and also I found, so those are all S17s actually. There's one S19 in there. That's the one that's at an angle. I just kind of threw that in there to test some other stuff with. But right now they're all S17s in oil. But what I've found too is that the S17s have actually been very reliable for me. Now, I also have this, along with them being in an oil tank, it's also connected to a 17,000-gallon water pool, which is actually just a swimming pool for my kids. And in a daily 24-hour cycle, it only fluctuates by maybe 2 degrees. So it keeps very, very stable temperatures, even if the outside temperature changes like 40 degrees. So these ones actually still have fans on right there. There's fans on the backside that kind of help with the flow. And some people argue, oh, you can't have fans, you got to take them off. Like, well, these are the tanks. This one here, there's 5 of them. There's no fans in that. That one runs at about 135 degrees Fahrenheit. The ones with fans run at 120. Everything else is the same. Of course, there's 5 miners instead of 4, but yeah, I actually haven't had any problems with fans running in oil specifically.
One of the things we should mention, we forgot to say this earlier, but just quickly, when he says that he had an S9 running at 20 terahashes per second, just to illustrate how ridiculous that is, normally Bitmain S9s run at about 13.5. So that's like a 70% increase in hash rate from running this thing in oil. Like, that's insane.
Yeah. And so I think that I believe the stock frequency is 550 megahertz, if I remember right. And I know for sure it was like 950 something megahertz. So, I mean, yeah, it was a lot. It was like almost 100% increase in clock speed.
Yeah, he basically bought another miner and put it in there, but he didn't.
And I'm sure the efficiency went down, but I mean, and it was stable though. That's the thing.
You were saying coin heated though. Also, I think you were telling me that even with the fans running in the oil, it slows the fans down so much that not only are they not making a gigantic disturbance in the fluid or cavitation or anything like that, that just because the machine was cool enough to slow the fans down, that it really wasn't actually even a much larger power draw than just not having fans at all.
Right. So, I mean, I'm running 2 fans on the ones that are upright. There's the main running quote right way to do it is to have it vertical, and then to have the oil flow from the bottom up and then over a lip into an overflow. But I've been running it both ways. I've been running an overflow one. I've been running one vertical. I've run pretty much just about every possible configuration in a single tank that you could do. 4 fans, 2 fans, 1 fan. Even with 1 fan from an S17, it still actually runs, keeps it cool enough, being horizontal, like standard, that it doesn't overheat, and it's just wild. I'm actually working with some fan manufacturers to see if I can get them to send me an STL file of the fan blades and have somebody modify that fan blade and actually make a fan designed for in oil use. So it would be useless in air, but it would actually work quite well in oil.
Yeah, so it would have way. I think me and you were talking about this.
Yeah.
So it would have way less resistance in liquid than the resistance that you need in air to push all that airflow, and then you could circumnavigate the because otherwise, if you take the fans off, you're going to need fan spoofers, and those are unreliable at best. I mean, you got some good ones for the S19s, but it sounds like the ones for anything What's Miner is kind of garbage right now.
For I guess the listeners, fan spoofers, when you have stock firmware on some of these hardwares, you cannot disable the fans. If you unplug them or tamper with them, they will not work. So a benefit of having like a custom firmware is that you can just check a box to disable them, which allows you to out of the box use immersion cooling. And people sell these things called fan spoofers. They look like something you just plug into the fan.
Almost.
Yep. Yeah, I think the actual term for them is fan emulators, but they're just fan
fakers.
So it's a 4-pin thing that gets the PWM sense from the control board and sends back a TAC reply back to the miner saying, "Yeah, I'm going the speed that you want me to go at," when there's really no fan at all. But the downside of running a fan simulator is that what I found in oil is that so far I've actually found it beneficial to have some fan on there, even at a very low RPM, just to have a little bit extra flow going over the heat sinks themselves, rather than allowing the heat to rise with a slow flow.
Yeah, and I was thinking shaving the fan blades down.
Yeah, I tried that. I didn't do very good.
It didn't work?
Well, I just plugged it into a drill press and with a wood chisel tried it, and so
yeah. No, I was thinking rather than
no, but like I said, I'm going to see about actually getting an STL file and having a fan blade designed from ground up specifically for oil. Then it would actually put a reasonable RPM back. I know we had that graphic up a little bit ago showing the S17 that I super overclocked, but even in brain, here we go. So this is the S17 that or S17 Plus, excuse me. So this is a 76T machine. So normally the cards would run at 24 terahash, or excuse me, 25 like 0.3, I suppose. And the power limit stock is about 3,000. And the recommended for brains is 2.728. So and this is with one card, so we can see it's nearly double the output. But we have a fan speed of 100%, but I'm getting nothing reported on RPM because it's actually below 300 RPM, and that's the lowest I've ever seen it register in brains and still have an RPM. And I don't know, this would be a great question for Jan, is if that's a hardware thing that the hardware sensor can't detect below that, or if that's more of a brain thing that just below 300 it ignores it.
I will check with our FPGA developer. I think there's some filter on that, but I don't know from top of my head really what the lowest limit is. I would expect that 300 RPM and below should be measurable.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll check. That's an interesting question.
But that's
you would in air, if you had anything lower than that, you would be not moving any air and it'd be terrible. But in oil, it's perfect.
You're running horizontal though, right?
So with fans, it's running just like you would run it in air for the position. Without fans, it turns 90 degrees and it's facing upward instead of laying flat.
Yeah, because okay, that was the difference. That's what I was wondering, because we're actually forcing the fluid through the machines, so I think the fans may actually inhibit the flow of the dielectric through the machine, because we're pushing it through. But
probably not faster than the fans would move it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point.
Isn't that twofold though? Because you have the fans on, and that's an extra power draw that you could direct towards the miners, but then you're improving your airflow. I guess. Do you have any comments on that? or the liquid flow. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're saving by unplugging the fans. But see what coin heated is doing too is it's slowing the machine itself is slowing the fan down so much that he's saving a percentage of the electric usage that he has. By us removing our fans, it saves somewhere between 10 and 15% of electric usage.
And so if you go, I don't know if you can pull the video, but
he's not getting the same gain.
Yeah, the upper left tank that has 5 miners, that one is fan free. But so my thinking in this, so if you have 4 fans per miner, and you have a fan that's specifically made for oil, so it can move a good amount of oil and it will actually, do a decent job, you would not need a pump. So then you get back all the energy that you had pushing a pump, because the pumps I have, they're like a couple of amps at 110 volt, and that's not a trivial amount of power. And if you have 5 miners in a tank, let's just say, you have 4 fans down there per, the probability of all of those fans completely failing at the same time is much less than 1 pump failing for a whole tank.
I'd love to hear, I mean, we could go and talk about immersion forever, but I'd love to hear from Brett and Marty, like what kind of things you guys are seeing, in the different regions that you're mining in, because you're getting cold temperatures, you're getting very hot temperatures, and I'm sure you're having to optimize different features, underclocking, overclocking, and maybe your air cooling versus having AC units or whatever. I guess what issues are you having on like a big scale mining operation, and how are you solving those, or what limitations are you finding?
So we're predominantly in North Dakota and in the Bakken here in the United States because of the climate. Our engineers have just decided that it's just more conducive to run air cooled up in those regions compared to somewhere like West Texas or another hot region, maybe the Haynesville Shale down in Louisiana. And I actually find this discussion about the fans very fascinating because we are designing an immersion cooling system at Great American Mining. And I think it's interesting for us. We have different parameters because we're very space constrained since we're building these in shipping containers. And so that's like the number one sort of boundary and variable restriction, whatever you want to call it, design parameter that it really comes into play with us, because considering how much the coolant cost, you have to weigh the trade-offs of the initial capital outlay and the amount of hash rate that container's going to produce per square foot. And so the fans discussion is something that I notice our engineers talk about a lot. Like, do we take off the fans to get more space? Is there a benefit of having them on? So these are, when it comes to immersion specifically, these are some of the types of things that we have to think about at Great American Mining with our container model, are the space constraints. And it's fascinating to hear you guys talk through all this.
You guys use primarily what's miners, right? So you're really at the mercy of the firmware. I guess I'm just curious, obviously, because I'm working for a firmware company, so I'm curious how you guys work around some of the issues that you're seeing there for immersion or air cooled.
I mean, we use the stock firmware because we have to. Obviously, we're talking closely with the Brains team and others working on firmware. Some we're getting our hands on and testing. I mean, what I can say about what's miners, they've been beasts for us. We haven't really had a problem outside of not being able to gain efficiencies and stretch our hash a bit more via firmware up or different types of firmware. With that being said, the machines themselves are very durable from our experience. We've been using them since they launched the M20s, and we've had M20s in the field for almost 3 years now. I think out of one container that we first launched had 180. I think we've only ever had one full failure in the field in these rough conditions in North Dakota.
And I have to agree, like, we don't run a lot of watts miners, But the Watts miners that we do run, I've had a very, very good experience with. Again, like same thing that Marty was saying, they can't get like aftermarket firmware. We can't get any third-party stuff on there. So we're basically waiting on Brains OS as well. We would love to go to Watts miners. The thing about Watts miners that I think is a main selling point on them is with any Bitmain machine, their boards have one heatsink per chip. So you have a bunch of these heat sinks dotted all over the board, and there's space between them. Like there's areas where stuff can get in there. One of the things that I saw when taking apart Watts miners is they have solid heat sinks. It's one piece. It covers the entire board, and they just slap on both sides of this board. And so that helps to keep a lot of things out. Like we actually had an instance, because we're up in Canada, of some snow getting in with these Watts miners. I think we only had like one board damaged, and it was crazy that these things survived the snow. Like obviously the power supply failed because they're not quite as secure, but the boards are amazing. The board design on Watts miner is excellent. That being said, we mostly run S9s, mostly because of Brains OS. Again, like I've talked about this is a huge thing for us because Brains OS is so useful for what we're doing. Marty has, I think, a lot bigger scale than we do. Like it's easier for them to scale. They have a lot more gas access than we do, but we're trying to scale sort of like to more people, more decentralization on a smaller scale. So we're trying to put out a lot of small things, whereas they're trying to put out a few big things. And the toughest part about putting out a few small things is we have to be able to regulate how much power they're actually using. And I talked about this earlier, having Brains OS and the ability to go into a unit and say, I need to drop this by 50 watts on 64 miners for a total of like 3,200 watts. Like I need to drop this 3,200 watts. It's super, super nice to be able to do that.
You were saying earlier that you can do a lot of that remotely, right? So you have access to a lot of your...
Yep. So with all of our units, we have ways to access them remotely. I can remotely access the network that is inside of each of our units. And so if somebody says, hey, we're having gas issues today, like we need you to bring it down, I can just bring it down. Or if somebody says, hey, I want this directed somewhere else, we can change that. Or like there's lots of different things we can do remotely. And there's so many configurations options using Brains OS that we can do remotely, either through SSH and doing it through a terminal, or actually even through the web interface.
Dude, you're an absolute wizard. Like I have to be on site if I want to access a machine itself. And I kind of did that for security reasons, but I'm going to be honest, I did that more for I'm incompetent to be able to do what you just explained right there. It was amazing.
Well, I have to agree with you. It's maybe not quite as secure. That's kind of one of the main issues that we have with it is it's not as secure. But again, like if you set up a login and all that stuff properly, you use secure passwords, you should be fine. I'm always happy to like help you out if you want to. Like, feel free to give me a PM. You have my information.
Yeah.
That's kind of my background. So I've been in IT for 25 years, and I set up networks and data centers and all that sort of stuff. So that's almost not even relevant to miners exactly, because I mean you can have a data center of regular servers, and getting that remote access is once you get into the site, which would in your case just be a shipping container or a hash hut or whatever it is, you get into that, and then you can get into the web interface of the other miners, and it's not too bad. Or you can just open up Telnet to the whole world.
Open up Telnet to the whole world. Good idea.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for these operations, if you want to scale, you're going to have to figure out how to control this stuff remotely. If you're trying to do this at any scale, and it is crazy how simple you can make the stack if need be. Especially if you're sorry, my son's in the background. Especially if you're like designing your own power distribution units and you have control over that. And with Watts miners specifically, like we've been able to really granularly control them remotely just because of the API that they have. And you can build on that pretty robustly.
This is another thing that I've actually really enjoyed with Brains OS. Speaking of API and stuff, with Brains OS, I found it really easy. And there's a lot of documentation on this. I've actually found that it's easier to read the Brains OS API documentation than CG Miner. And so, for those of you who don't know what an API is in this context, an API is an application programming interface. It's something coders use to kind of access data and stuff about different systems. And so, in the case of Brains OS, the Boss Miner API, because Boss Miner is their back end, can be used to get all sorts of data: hash rate data, fan data, heat data, pool data. You can change pool information, all sorts of stuff with that. And so you can create automated systems that will legitimately change anything about your miner based on different things. And you could run a Raspberry Pi just on the network with these miners and just ping them every once in a while, find the hash rate, find the temperature, whatever. And if you have to drop hash rate, like change tuning, drop temperature, increase fan speed, something like that, that's where you can use the API to do that. And so that's something that's really useful as well.
Yeah, I'm doing exactly that. I specifically even have Raspberry Pi, so I got one. It's in the video too, but it has temperature probes for all the tanks, but then it also pulls all the miners themselves and pulls that API information back. And then that brings that back into 2 TVs in my room that I can watch, and within 30 seconds, I know if anything's gone wrong with it. I'll see if I can find the photo of the TVs, but in the video, it's just a little stupid yellow box, so that part's not very interesting. But yeah, the API results from Brains is awesome, and then further, you can do more where you would have that talk back, and then like, oh, the tank is too hot, the oil temperature is too hot, so let's set these miners in this tank back down more.
Yep, and that's what's awesome. Actually, it's funny story. I'm designing a little system for our test bench. And so at Upstream, we try to test every single S9 that comes through, get Brains on it, get it all set up and prepared to go out in a unit. And so we have to run thousands of S9s through our shop, and they all have to be tested and installed and set up. And so I'm actually designing a little system, because we just upgraded to kind of a new area with more room. We used to do 4 at a time. We're moving up to something like 24 or 32 at a time. And so I'm designing a system that uses the API to get information on 24 or so miners at a time. And then we can just say, hey, this miner works, pull it off, put it on the pallet, get a new one. This miner works, pull it off, pallet, get a new one, and just kind of keep the system going, make it as fast and easy as possible.
So maybe the Brains guys can answer this. It was something we were talking about a little bit before we went live. I'm curious about when you shut off a miner, like the fans just stop, right? Is the heat that's already built up in the miner going to be an issue for that? And then I guess the reason why I was kind of directing it at the Brains guys was because wouldn't it be advantageous to keep the fans running for a little bit when you shut the miner off? I don't know if I'm taking us totally off track here. It was just something that I just was thinking about again.
I guess, Jan, if you want to talk about the preheat stuff and everything.
I will try to speak to that. Well, the preheat part is definitely important part of the process to get the machine to run at some nominal speed or performance level. But I think you hit the nail by explaining what happens if you cut the power, right? Shutting down the machine gracefully. Currently, what happens with with the current firmware, if you have fan control enabled still, so if you shut down the machine, so that means it's, let's say, suspended. We have the suspend resume feature, whatever. Anyhow, like stopping boss miner is also a valid approach. Then we have a monitor that actually keeps the fans running, which some people find annoying, but at the same time, especially for the X17 family, this was critical, because if you like cut off power and the machine like stops running all of a sudden, the problem is that because of the bad soldering on the PCBs, or let's say not bad soldering but lower quality soldering that works well in immersion but not in air-cooled environments, you have to realize that the way the heat is taken away from the chips is by conducting the heat through the heat sinks, right? And it works by the fact that you have a certain temperature gradient. So the end of the heat sink has a different temperature than the chip. If the fans stop all of a sudden and you like don't generate any more power by the fact that the chips are not hashing anymore, you still have a short moment of time where this heat conduction process slows down because the gradient just breaks down. There's no airflow anymore, and that could damage the PCB, but not for the new gen, for the X19s, nor for the S9s, because they have different soldering technology and they are much more resilient to things like this. So that would be for the power cutoff, and that's nothing that the firmware can do because it has no power. But in terms of graceful shutdown, it's certainly a good idea to have a feature like this that keeps the fans running for a certain time. I kind of think about this sometimes when you have turbocharged vehicles, when you hit the gas and run the engine really hard on the highway when you park in front of your house. Some of the manufacturers tell you should keep your engine running for a little bit until the blades of the turbocharger cool down a bit, because if you stop it, all of a sudden they could like twist or whatever by the cooling process. So that's how I try to think about this physical process that could happen to the PCBs for the X17 gen.
And that's actually what made me think about it, is because so the cars you're talking about, it's actually the bearings on the turbocharger heat up so much. And I think they've mainly, we're not here to talk about cars, but they mainly remedied that because they have oil cooled bearings now. So that saves it from that. But it was the same concept, basically. That's what I was going for.
Yeah, you need to keep the oil running for a little bit more before you stop the whole process. Otherwise, the bearings have no easy way to okay, yeah.
Yeah, and they don't cool down, and they've swelled up they will swell up from the heat, and it'll just seize it up. And then, I mean, when you're talking about running 135, 140 degrees Fahrenheit chips, like that needs some cool down time.
There's a question from Hornet M about this, about what's minor firmware. I guess that kind of covers this this whole topic, because yes, this feature takes care of it if you have fans running while you suspend hashing. I think this is the best that you can do for the PCBs.
Yeah. So the question was about if Watts minor firmware letting you suspend hashing while your fans continue. Same thing we're talking about now, just with Watts minor firmware. It does that?
That sounds like it. The question was if that would not help the heat dissipation, and the answer is yes, that definitely helps.
It definitely would help. I don't.
But is that an actual feature of Watts minor firmware?
No, I've never seen that.
It's okay. I'm not familiar with those details in the stock firmware.
Yeah, neither am I. And this is one of the tough things about stock firmware for maybe some of us, is maybe we don't have as much experience running stock firmware as we do this aftermarket stuff that's so much better.
He says it's in there.
Yeah, it's in there.
By the way, an interesting question. If there's support for Prometheus, I don't know if you guys know this technology. Prometheus is a standard protocol and a software package that scrapes data from server software, basically taking metrics. And maybe the question is if support for Prometheus inside of BrainsOS or any other firmware would be an interesting thing. So what are your thoughts on this? Because we use it internally a lot, I would say.
Yeah, I've never touched it, but it like if it's something that's just scraping data, you said from like the API, it would probably scrape data from, or from like web.
The way Prometheus works is that there's a standard, let's say API or format, how the data is to be exported by the software that's being scraped. And then the Prometheus itself then goes regularly to this. It's a web, basically HTTP technology. It just goes to the website of with the metrics. It's a simple text file. It can have a binary form, and then it downloads it every, I don't know, scraping by 1 second, 10 seconds, depends on your data plan and so on, whatever you want to configure. But the whole point is that the machine itself doesn't have to be like actively pushing any telemetry data anywhere. It just publishes them, whoever wants, sort of like looking at the API. But this is just another form. But the benefit is that you don't have to develop the whole dashboard technology, like time series processing. All the data is included in Prometheus, and then you use Grafana to do nice charts.
Okay, so the idea would be something like what me or CoinHeated designed with using the Boss Miner API, but the idea is it would be something a little bit more for
let's say sure. Can you imagine that all the data or all the interesting data that you want to be plotted that are currently kind of like sprinkled in the CG Miner API, because when we were developing this, we were kind of forced to keep it at least partially backwards compatible, or make it compatible with what the original pristine CG Miner source published, because what the manufacturers turned it into was very far from the original design of CK, right? Of Concalibus. He had some ideas what should be exported, and it was really designed around the GPUs. And then the manufacturers basically took the sources and twisted it into something. And if they liked a certain section of the API, they just glued in some random data without any really good structure. So you can think about it and actually it's not that much work if we transform this data that is exported in the CG Miner API into whatever is understood by Prometheus Scraper, and then you just deploy your Prometheus Scraper in your facility or at home, whatever, and then you get the charts pretty much for free.
Well, is there an option that you could maybe just put it on a different port? So instead of 4028 for the API,
sure, that could be that could be an alternative thing. In fact, a feature that we're working on is that for some customers who have issues with, let's say, connectivity, it would be interesting to give them a tooling that would very reliably scrape the data, how the Stratum client behaves, that would allow debugging like their particular setup.
Is that inside the new Brains OS manager that you guys are developing?
No, it's not in there, because if you have problems with the connectivity, this thing is not going to help you. You basically have to run this like a probing software on your end with this connectivity unreliability, and once you scrape the data locally, you can send it to us, and then we can have a look and see how the client was behaving. But theoretically, this can be like displayed on client end. The problem is that it is useful for a couple miners. So when you're like really looking at detailed data for a couple miners, but when you want to do like thousands and thousands of miners, then it becomes kind of cluttered. So more thought needs to be put into how you want to present the data from every single miner, because then you have to do some aggregation and so on.
So I can definitely talk to some of that. So part of my day job is I manage literally thousands of workstations and hundreds of servers. Here on the screen now, we've got the two TVs, obviously the Slushpool dashboard, and then over on the right is
just a casual 1.09 petahash.
I'm working on it. It's a little low right now. So then on the right is I'm pulling data directly from the API results, and then I have a script that parses out the information that I really want. And so in this right-hand screen, what I have is there's two windows. You can see the red and blue window, and then the single blue window, or I guess, yeah. And so the red and blue is the chip is in red, and blue is the board temperatures. And there's actually 3 lines, so there's for each card, and then the single line is the hash rate. And so this specifically just has 12, and then it cycles through different dashboards. But then over here on the right then is a overall status circle, and we can see one thing's in yellow, which means it's kind of getting close to a temperature rating threshold that I have. Then the ones off to the right is my overall bandwidth, and then those multiple lines in the kind of bottom right are all the tank temperatures. So in an overview look, I can see immediately what's going on. And you're definitely right that, I mean, if you have 1,000 of them, you're not going to have 1,000 individual things on here. But you could make a total status screen with a donut like that, and you can see, oh, we've got this many that are in red in a complete fail state, or we have a spike in temperature on this particular tank, or ambient temperature if you're running air cooled or whatnot. And you can find that in relatively short order and get email alerts on that and the whole thing. Usually when I set this up for servers and such, I'll know of a problem long before the customer knows about it, because I'll get alerted about it within 30 seconds. And being able to pull that information from Brains directly is awesome. And then I also get full history. So I keep history for a year, and then I can find out, I can go back like, oh, this thing's been running at, let's say 90 C or something like that. If I look back over a 30-day period, I can say, oh, on this day something happened, or whatnot. But I can go into that historical data, and I think running it directly on a miner, I don't, unless there's a way to have additional storage on it. I know you can use like a 16 gig card, but I don't know how much data that would be is accessible to the miner itself, or I should say, to Brains itself, and be able to write the historical information.
Quick nerd question: how are you doing your charts?
Yeah, this is PRTG. So okay. It would be similar to Prometheus or Grafana. It's just one of the ones that I use commercially all the time anyway. And then there's a free version for up to 100 sensors, so I'm just using that.
Nice. That's pretty awesome. Actually, I can talk about, so we did another thing that's similar. This is kind of part of what we offer clients. I've set up a web server, actually, that does this for like hundreds of units that we have out. And it basically just keeps historical data, and we pull from the slush pool API instead, because it's actually a little bit cheaper data wise, because we have a very limited amount of data coming from each of our units. Like, we want to reduce that as much as possible. Like maybe 5 to 10 gigabytes a month is kind of what we'd aim for. But we can pull historical data, and that's really useful for a lot of people, because they can go in and see, hey, my unit's at 0, like I need to check this out. Or if you have someone out there that you don't want accessing your slush pool account, then you can just give them that login, and they basically get view only access to it.
So one thing that I personally like about PRTG, and it's not a show for them, I'm sure other things do it, but you can have what's known as remote probes. And so you could have a Raspberry Pi in a container, let's say, and so that aggregates all the direct data to that, and then just sends back a small amount back up to the main node.
That's interesting. We were thinking of implementing Raspberry Pis into the unit at one point, into each unit, but for a different reason, and that was proxying, like aggregating the data that actually goes to the pool. And so that would basically be taking all the actual like hash rate, sort of, as you would kind of think about it, and sending it through one central location, combining it, and then pushing it to the pool from there. But I just have never really had a good way to like implement something like that alongside it. So that might be something to look into. It's interesting.
Fun stuff for sure.
Is this? I mean, I'm seeing all that you're doing, Jonathan. I assume that at some point in the future, like Bitcoin keeps succeeding, that there will be room to implement tools such as what you were showing in mining stacks. Like right now, you kind of have to make it on your own, and it sounds like Brett's doing similar things, but there are no accessible tools to the everyday person.
Well, I mean, I love open source stuff, and that's one of my favorite things about Brains and the Raspberry Pi specifically. Just the cost of the Pi alone is so small and relatively inconsequential. And being able to, a goal of mine that I would really love to do is to be able to have basically a Raspberry Pi that could manage, X number of miners, have that aggregate data coming in from all the miners, and have the whole thing open source. You could just release an SD card image, and like, here you go, you throw it on the network, it finds your miners by IP that you allow it to find, and then it can start collecting that data.
Yeah, that'd be very cool. Unless there's other threads to pull on with this one, I'm sure you and Brett could go back and forth for a while.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, we should probably shut up. I talk too much.
No, it's super interesting. Just kind of made me think of something.
It's like it highlights just how early we are in this whole industry. Like building these monitoring systems alone is something that you just have to do from scratch if you want to do it correctly. And I think it highlights like the canvas that we have in front of us to build a really cool industry, all the way down from like the hardware to the software stack. And just think about the efficiencies that are going to be gained from this practical software thrown on top of these systems.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about the Pi is that there's all kinds of releases for it. Like there's the Raspy Blitz, which is for the full node. You just download the whole thing, it sets everything up for you, and off you go. And being able to have something like that would directly integrate within Brains and pull that information and feed stuff back, such as miner control. And then if you took it even a step further and doing immersion, and then it would actually be able to know tank temperatures on top of just the miner itself, and being able to have those talk to each other back and forth is, well, that's something I'm working on.
One thing I would love to, I think John, you and I talked about this with all mining setups right now, you kind of optimize for watt usage. Like when we talk about the auto tuning feature that Brains offers, you're optimizing for a certain wattage. So you're maximizing your terahash for that wattage. But as this technology progresses and these miners start entering homes for heating, which I think upstream data is kind of hinted at, and kind of what you're working on heating your pool. It would be awesome to start optimizing for chip temperature. So if you had firmware to optimize so that the chip temperatures were, I don't know, say 70 degrees during the winter, you could kind of pump that into your house and regulate that. And then the temperature or the watt input would scale up and down to match that. Just kind of act as a thermostat essentially.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that was one of my first focuses and getting those probes to register on the Pi, so the Pi knows the tank temperature, and if you can make that tank oil temperature steady, and when it rises or drops, then it can change the miner output to adjust also. Suddenly you have a heat source very similar to what you would have in a home, where you never have your heater on 100% all the time, or just off 100% all the time. When it gets a little bit cold, it turns on for a while, turns off for a while, and it would be similar to that. Obviously, you're going to want to have them mining as much as possible. You don't want them just to have them off and being idle. And then I'm working on systems for that, where then you would basically, instead of piping the heat inside the house, you would pipe it outside, kind of like how a air conditioner works, where you have that external unit. And then in colder climates, you would just keep it all internal, and it would go through whatever heating system you have.
And I definitely think that that's going to be worked on in the future, but I don't think that that's where the money is. Like everything is incentivized for these companies to get as many miners online as possible. And if you bring on a few miners here and there to heat a home, that's not going to pay the bills. That's not going to pay all your developers. So you're having to be creative with these Raspberry Pis and kind of optimizing that on your own. But I do think in the next epoch, the next 4 years, we might start seeing some stuff like that. And I don't know. I just think that's probably one of the things that I'm the most fascinated about is that coming into the everyday house.
Well, and if you think about it, I mean, especially with ASICs, so when we step back before ASICs, it was computers, and then people were hashing at home, right? Because it was just your computer. And then it went to graphics cards, and it got a little more, but it was still your computer. You got to ASICs and then high-speed fans, and nobody wanted them in their home because they're basically as loud as a shop vac. And so if we bring that back around again and put them into an enclosure that can dissipate that volume of heat with low fan noise, you can kind of bring it back into that market again.
Well, was there three of us had to shut our miners off just so that we could do this? Just so that we could do this live recording and not have...
Yeah, I don't have that problem over here. I don't know what you're talking about.
No, I know you don't. I know you.
Actually, I have 5 on air cool right now, so I'm just giving them crap.
Matt Odell said he'd cover the blocks we lose by turning them off, so that was really nice of him.
Haven't hit any blocks yet, so we're gonna have to keep pushing this one.
He might not know that.
The freaks know when they haven't heard me for 45 minutes is a good dispatch.
Slushpool mined the block a little over an hour ago. I think we might have caught a block.
Oh, I do want to ask you guys though, because this is an honest question. I don't know. Does mining over Tor actually impede any of your hash rate or anything like that? Because I just rock a VPN, seems to work fine for me. I would like to be a little more I don't know, clandestine about it. I don't know if it's possible because my utility company already knows that I'm sucking down a tremendous amount of power, but I don't know how mining over Tor works. Is it even feasible?
I'm not the best person to talk about this, but I think as long as you have a good internet connection, it's not a huge deal.
All right, because I was afraid that since Tor is kind of...
You don't want to mine over Tor.
All right,
you have to use a VPN, and a hardcore miner will tell you that a VPN has too much latency, but I think the privacy gains are worth it.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with that.
I have a question while I have all these mining wizards on, and we were talking about coin heated and Brett's like using a Raspberry Pi for remote diagnostic. A lot of us, non-professional miners talk about Stratum V2 being a great addition to the ecosystem in terms of incentives, but it has an additional cost basically to miners that they have to run their own nodes and construct their own blocks. That's the advantage of Stratum V2. One of the main advantages of Stratum V2 is that they're in control of the blocks and they're using their own node. Is that something the people on the panel right now are excited about, or is that something you're not even you wouldn't even want to do that? You wouldn't even want that extra overhead.
Did you just say Stratum V2 has downsides? You wouldn't. You don't even have to do that. You don't have to do blocks.
Boo this man.
But is that something you guys want? Like, do you want that?
Block selection, transaction selection?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
It is an extra burden on the miner because you do have to run your own node in some way. And I don't know if that would appear on the, in the mining hardware that you buy, or if you'd have to pair it with something. I assume once it comes out, there'll be like proxy services. You can tell Slushpool or F2 Pool to pick blocks for you, but I don't know. I see what you're saying, Matt. That definitely is an extra burden on the miner that hasn't been really talked about. But I think 99% of the world is excited for V2.
I'm excited for V2. I think it's going to be really useful with reducing like the empty block mining, I guess. I like block selection is exciting. I don't know how, like maybe Marty can speak more to this. I don't know how it's going to work for some of the bigger miners. Like, I don't know if this is something that's really exciting for you, Marty, being able to kind of choose what blocks you want to mine. But I'm just excited for some of the other features like data usage reduction with Stratum V2, that kind of stuff. Like there's lots of cool stuff that goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're certainly excited for it. And I think all the efficiency gains and then the being able to create your own block and having to run a full node, you're thinking about it, you're already running hundreds of computers and setting up these networks and connecting with the pool. Like for us, I mean, we have a bunch of Bitcoiners on our engineering team. Austin, I don't think he'd have a problem spinning up a full pairing it with our operations, even if we had to do multiple full nodes per container or a full node per container, or we could just create our own subnet with its own signal full node. Yeah, I don't want to see that being a problem, and it's always a good option to have in the very least the ability to create your own block. I guess the interesting question is after that, once you feed it to the pool, to slush pool, like is that a point at which it can be rejected and they can pick another block? I guess that's the one of the steel man questions that we would ask.
Like if you had a troll miner that was just constructing horrible blocks.
Yeah, if the block gets rejected, then does the pool lose it and it goes back?
Can I shortly speak to this?
Please.
I'm one of the authors of the draft of the V2 with Pavel. Currently, we're working with Square Crypto, who greatly took over the V2 efforts, and they are actually focusing on adding functionality into Bitcoin Core that would allow the job negotiation to happen, because there's a part that's just needed also on the Bitcoin Core end. Secondly, you need essentially the job negotiation protocol is a sub protocol of V2. So it's not the mining part; it's the negotiation part. So initially, the miner has to negotiate that the work that he has selected with the pool is valid, but at the same time, he can. I mean, that's the proposal. He can already start submitting the results based on his templates, and they can be rejected later on. So that means the pool cannot let you know that the stuff that you submitted is garbage because it tells you it's okay, but it's going to show. The idea is that it would show up in the accounting, essentially, that this was garbage. And the reason is that you want to be as efficient process as possible, because if you as a miner are able to construct your own template as fast as possible, there's just no good reason for the pool to slow down the process of you submitting the results, right? The validation can come after, but it cannot be real time because there's some negotiation being done in parallel to this. So it's pretty complex concept, and it has some additional requirements on the pool software. So the pool end also has to be feature rich in order to support something like this. So once the Square Crypto guys are done with their stuff, we can start thinking about this. That being said, I feel that there's a lot of rumors around this feature that people find it as a super important thing. I think it's a super important thing as a safety protocol feature in case censorship would start happening. Well, it started happening last year, right, with certain new pools, but you still have the option to switch over to another pool. But the great strength that I'm seeing with V2 is simply switching over to a straightforward binary. V2 isn't what Satoshi envisioned. Well, Satoshi, right, started with get block template. So I think I forgot the flow now.
So do you think, is it possible that with V2, with individuals constructing their own blocks, can the individual construct empty blocks?
Oh yeah, sure. Why not? It's an accounting problem, because let's say it's a corner case, but let's say you're the evil miner who for some reason likes empty blocks, right? So you're going to be proposing empty blocks. They're completely fine. They're legal. You're not proposing invalid transactions, so they're going to be approved by the pool unless there is some special policy on this. But let's say the pool allows it. But what needs to be reflected is that you're essentially reducing the reward of other miners, right? Because the hash rate, the portion of the hash rate that
the portion of the transaction rewards that you normally would have gotten, not going to be.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
So that would have to be compensated somehow. That the rewards that you would be getting from the other blocks mined by other miners, so your cut would have to be reduced, and it would have to reflect the fact that you are in favor of empty blocks. So that's like the more involved part.
People are going to migrate away from you for the same reason that why people will migrate away from, let's say, censored transactions or something like that.
Right.
Like, there are transactions out there that are willing to pay someone, and there's always someone willing to mine those transactions. So you would actually be in a worse position than somebody. Yeah. I get it. I'm seeing it now.
But originally, what I wanted to say, I see the strength of the V2 in just the pure engineering improvement of the security and the efficiency of the transfers of data. Because I don't know if you looked in detail what V1 contains, but every single submission contains the string, right? Mining submit or whatever that message is called. It's like a useless string that could be expressed by a single byte, but we have transferred throughout the years like terabytes and terabytes of this useless data. Speaking of which, for locations that have some bandwidth constraints, that could actually be interesting. So that's one part, the data efficiency of the protocol itself, then the overall efficiency, where certain messages don't need to be sent when you broadcast new jobs and so on. And last but not least is the security part. So now the protocol itself, from user perspective, acts as what we're used to when using the web, right? You have HTTPS, and your browser contains the root certificates that have been used to sign the actual server certificate of your favorite website. And the same concept, but in a much reduced way, is implemented in V2. It uses noise protocol framework, and it has chosen one of the handshakes that allows authenticating the server. There's no need to authenticate the client for this purpose. And all the
Did we lose him?
Yeah, we might have lost him. He was talking about the noise protocol. I can kind of go on about the noise protocol. I don't know a whole lot about noise protocol, but the idea is it's used before actually initializing the connection. What the noise protocol does is it basically connects to the server from the client, and they do what's called a handshake. And they basically just check some keys, that kind of stuff, some general like security stuff, just to make sure that people.
This is between the miner and the pool, right?
The pool. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that noise handshake just basically ensures that the pool is actually who they say they are, using some encrypted keys, that type of stuff. And then after that, they open an encrypted tunnel between the pool and the miner, and it's like you're literally putting like a tube around your connection. Like nobody can get into that. They can see kind of where it's coming from, but they can't really tell where it's going. They can't really tell the data, and it's kind of messy for people. And on top of that, one of the nice things about Stratum v2 using this noise protocol handshake and also this encrypted connection is that it prevents what's called a man-in-the-middle attack, which is where people basically go, they pretend they're the pool, whether that be your ISP could do something like that, or somebody malicious, some malicious actor. They would get between you and the pool. They'd say, hey, we're X pool that you're using. So give us some portion of your hash rate, and then they'd kind of proxy you onwards. And if they do this right, it's barely even noticeable. It would be such a small portion, but they're still siphoning off your hash rate. And so V2 prevents that by basically encrypting all that data. Another really nice thing about V2, and I think Jan kind of talked about this a little bit, is how much it actually reduces bandwidth usage. So with V1, my understanding of V1 is that it sends JSON to and from the pool, maybe encrypted. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Kahuna knows a little more about that. But it sends JSON data between the pool and the miner, whereas some history on this. In the past, you would want your Stratum information to actually be human readable. You would want to be able to basically, if you really felt like it, go in and actually read your Stratum data from your miner or from the pool or whatever. And so JSON data, JavaScript object notation data, is human readable, and it's just a set of key value pairs. Whereas something like Stratum v2, I believe, uses binary. And so they're converting it into a non-human readable format, but the amount of bytes that are being used by it are actually considerably less. And so those are just some of the benefits of V2.
I don't know if you said the code's correct. I just am not technical enough, but you hit the nail on the head. Just going from human readable to, a smaller text format, you have less data to communicate between the pools and the miners, and that just requires less bandwidth. So if you're operating out in the middle of the ocean for a mining or an oil rig or something, that's less data you have to transfer back and forth, and that allows you to operate under a shittier internet connection.
Jan, did I mess up V2?
I think you did very well. I don't know at what point my connection cut off. I just saw my mic be muted. So can you guys hear me now, right?
Yes.
Yep. That's impressive that I actually managed to.
One note is. One note to noise is it's pretty much a standard thing that is being used by Signal, and I think even WhatsApp uses it for the end-to-end encryption. And what is good about it is it's a crypto done the right way, and it's very hard to do it wrong, because basically all you do is you design the handshake. There's a formal language for it, and you choose the handshake that fits your use case. Like if you want to authenticate both ends or just the server, which is the case for V2. And if I say, like, originally we were considering going with TLS 2.0, but then I had a talk with Matt Carroll, and he'll be like, wow, why do you want to use TLS 2.0? Because, like, even though TLS 2.0 is a good, technologically, it's up to date with the modern crypto. It's AEAD, so it's authenticated encryption with associated data. So what that means is that all the data is automatically encrypted, and at the same time, the protocol detects if anybody tampers with the data. So if you touch the encrypted data with the intention to, the server think that somebody sent garbage, but the garbage would get decrypted and interpreted, that's not the case, because it's easily detectable. So TLS is a great thing, but at the same time, it has to deal with all the backward compatible shit, and there's no formal verification. Whereas for the noise, it just doesn't have any backward compatible shit along with it, and it's a standard thing, and I think it has a formal verification. So it was actually a pleasure developing something like this, because everything was literally written in the spec of the noise protocol framework, and we just chose one of the handshakes and used Snow to generate the code for us for Rust, for example.
Nice.
But yeah, so that's why we chose, and I'm very grateful for Matt Corello's input on this, because he convinced me, literally, like saying, let's do it this way. I was like, that makes perfect sense. And at that time, I didn't even know that it existed, which was my engineering mistake. But yeah, so this part is, I think, very solid.
Oh, and by the way, for anybody in chat who wants to know just how crazy smart the team at Brains are, see if you can find the Stratum V2 specifications. That stuff is full of so much technical data. It's crazy. These people are amazing, and Jan is super smart. So I'm super excited for what V2 is eventually going to bring.
Jan, we have a question from Don Reddy in the chat about V2 and whether or not it changes or shifts any incentives. What is your viewpoint there?
I don't. That's actually, I noticed the question from a little while ago. I tried thinking about it. I don't think so. It changes incentives. I mean, depends how you look at it. Like from engineering perspective, people should have the incentive to use it, because I don't know how to get around the man-in-the-middle problem. At the same time, currently there are not too many pools implementing it. Essentially, we are the only one, so it's sort of like the prototype implementation. So that is not good environment to say that we have changed something. But it's a work in progress. But yeah. So the intention, the incentive is very strong, but in order to be usable, you need the server and you need the client, right? And until it's publicly implemented by our competitors, let's say, it's still not the case, right? And I guess the question was originally directed towards the transaction selection, which in my opinion is a very logical extension towards.
It might be worth knowing that if you're running Stratum V2, the miner and the pool still have to align with what the block proposal is. So in a Stratum V2, it says, hey, I want to mine this block. They hand it off to the pool if it's an empty block with no transactions in it, or if it's a block that doesn't pay the pool the Coinbase transaction, then they'll deny it. So if there's something in there that they don't like, they'll deny it. But what I'm getting at is they have to agree on the block that's being mined, and then once they do so, the miner is off to the races. They can mine that block. So miner still gets to pick the block. That's a protection against the pool doing something nefarious, but the pool still does have to agree to let them mine it.
So I was kind of asking the opposite. So do you remember when that guy he accidentally this was last epoch, he accidentally added the transaction fees into the block reward and mined that block, and it was like 13 Bitcoin something or whatever, and it got rejected. So what happens if an individual miner doing this does that? I guess that was the question I was originally asking, and maybe I missed it.
Well, that's the answer is pretty simple, because then such block is not valid and it's going to be invalid. I mean, the proposal of the block is invalid and the pool is going to reject it. So the pool can temporarily let you submit results, but you can think about it as if you had a buggy miner and it would be generating shares with wrong I don't know, end time, because it would be spinning the end time counter too fast. So like moving the time of the block, and there's a limit after which the proposed shares are not legal anymore and acceptable. So the pool would start rejecting it, and the only difference is that the pool would initially accept your shares because it doesn't know the details of the block that you're mining on. But once it figures out that these shares are associated with your own block that you proposed, in the final check, let's say, or a bill at the end. So when you go into some statistics, you would see that eventually all the shares have been rejected. Like so I don't see it as a problem. It's a firmware issue. It's a problem with
what if the person's miner who actually mined that block and then constructed the block poorly so that it became a rejected block?
It's an economical damage.
So then the pool doesn't hit the block either, then, though, right?
Right, but it just from pool perspective, it is the same as if that miner was not connected at all. Like, I mean, you can think about it that energy has been wasted because he has been mining and using that energy to generate shares that eventually are not valid because the block proposal, the block template is not valid. But the system should be designed in a way that we're not talking about hours here. It's just a matter of seconds. So once you construct such an invalid block template, you send it to the pool. It's doing its validation work, but at the same time, you already started mining on top of this proposed block. So it's going to be sorted out, and it should be sorted out in seconds. But these seconds are critical for the miner to work efficiently, because once it knows its template, it should start mining on top of it, right? It is the same issue as with the pool. Like anytime there's a new block found in the network, the biggest job that each pool has is to generate a new template and distribute it among the miners. V2 puts this a little bit further because it tries to propose you an alternative template to the current block, or to the current block template that is being mined. And when a new block is found in network and this alternative template is still valid, so it contains, let's say it could be empty, or it contains transactions that were from the second half of the mempool that were not for sure included with some probability. Let's say the ordering on different nodes is not always guaranteed. Then these miners, just by knowing or being notified by the pool that they're supposed to start mining on top of a new block template, they can already start mining because they already have the template from the pool. And this is exactly the same case with locally generated templates. You have it really fast. Let's say you're a big fan of empty blocks, so you start mining on your own empty block template. You keep submitting, and you just made a small mistake that the block output value is not 6.25, but it's 7. And if there's no transactions and the reward is over the consensus protocol, then this template is invalid. But the pool is going to tell you in a couple seconds probably, or even faster, and then it would start rejecting your shares, and all the shares that have been preliminary accepted until the point where we have found out that the block is not valid, or that the template is not valid, they would be their status would be changed in the accounting. So you will see that essentially your hash rate has dropped.
The miner would be burning electricity at their own cost.
No, it wasn't. It definitely wasn't a criticism. It was just a question. I was just wondering how exactly that would work, because.
It is important to realize that all these things have been already experienced by the pool developers. And I mean, trust me that throughout the history, all the different pool implementation must have had this issue where they actually wasted some of the energy because they basically mined something that was not valid. Well, and they realized it was a software mistake. But by this feature, you provide a security feature for Bitcoin network, because you can choose your own transactions, but it puts more responsibility on the software that is distributed among miners, that it generates valid templates based on their requirements.
Well, yeah, and it was my understanding that the person that screwed up that block that added wrong, fat fingered something, whatever they did, it was they actually solo mined a block, which is, in my understanding, damn near impossible. And they did that, and they lost out on it anyways, because then it just went to the next person or the next mining pool or whomever ended up mining the block afterwards. So that's what that's more what I was curious about, was whether or not that had been taken into consideration, because that could screw up things. But then you're saying that nobody is actually even going to know that you ever screwed up the block template. You just screwed
the pool
it up.
will the pool will know that you're an unfortunate miner that cannot generate valid templates. But and then the pool support may try contacting you, like if this is something that is happening regularly, then it's a software issue that should be fixed. So
But,
yeah,
like, as a miner though, you should be probably monitoring this, like if you're using V2 and you're actually doing your own transaction selection, instead of, say, passing that on to a pool or a third party or someone trusted to do transaction selection for you, you would assume these would be the type of miners that would actually be paying attention to their rejected shares and stuff to see if they've actually messed something up, wouldn't you? Until they learn better.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, the incentive is very strong, so I don't think this will be a very
that's a gigantic
frequent case. Yeah,
it's a gigantic learning curve from buying miners and plugging them in to, like, the first time I ever opened command line in my life was to install the Brains OS software, the Brains OS on the Ant miners. That is the first time I've ever opened command line in my life. And then now you fast forward a year, and I just got hash rate coming out of my fucking ears. And
Brand's a terminal wizard.
Yeah. Oh, I got another question. Are you guys bringing push notifications back ever on the app, the Slush Pool app?
for the blocks, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to just totally pivot in the middle of my sentence. I was reading.
No, it's okay.
Because I was reading the chat, which I shouldn't have been doing, and a buddy of mine hit it up.
I will talk to the product guys. I don't have an answer. I don't know. Because push notifications work in terms of the rewards that you're getting. I will check with them. I don't know.
Submit a ticket on Slush Pool. Send it to the Slush Pool team, and they'll help you out. Same thing that happens in the Brains OS chat.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to put a bunch of pressure on you guys. I was just reading it as I was talking, and I got confused on what I was saying. So I was like, I'll just say that.
Well, if there's anyone to ask, it's Jan.
It's all right.
Oh, there's an interesting question. Could multiple pools collude and push the alternative templates to include transactions that wouldn't be included otherwise? Oh yeah, sure. As long as the transactions are valid, right? I mean, as long as the network accepts it. So that was another one. From what I understand, they already.
With regards to the first question, wouldn't that mean that with these pools, these would have to be pools that aren't letting their miners do their own transaction selection? You would need pools doing transaction
non-stratum one pools, yeah.
Yeah. So you'd have to have colluding pools that are fighting basically against the actual people using them, being able to select their own transactions and then colluding to create their own block templates.
Another part of this comment is from what I'm reading done ready, right? From what I understand, the alternative templates are pushed out to speed up the wait time for previous block found. Yes, that is true. That could be actually one reason that you could start mining on a new block faster than your colleagues. The point that I'm trying to make is that once a new block is found in the network, so from that point when the pool knows about it, all your shares are going to be rejected until you learn about the new template.
Oh, okay. So that's kind of part of what I was, because if you cost the whole pool a block, then you're penalized for a little while until you can prove that what you're using or what you're doing to assemble the block is actually going to be valid next time that you assemble it. Then you can start.
You won't even be able to start mining with the pool unless you propose a block that they agree with. So if you put a piece of crap on my desk and I say, no, I'm not going to even let you mine this, then you won't even be able to work with us. It's like a contract. You have to agree to mine a constructive block for yourself and the pool.
But then that only means that it follows the consensus rules. But
if it's an empty block with no transactions, or it doesn't follow the consensus rules, or it breaks a rule that your pool demands, then it'll be rejected.
Okay.
You won't even have started mining it because we will not have agreed to let you mine that block.
Yeah, because essentially what a pool is they're just buying your hash rate, right? And then V2 is different, where it's a different structure.
V2 is I'm building a house. I'm hiring you to do the drywall. It's here I will do all these walls. I will sand everything. I'll mud everything. Do you agree? And I say yes, and then you get to work. If you just start, if I say no, then you're not even going to be contracted to work on my house. You're just going to get back.
Right. So it's the same.
It's
the
like
same thing. You're buying the work.
Right.
Yeah, it's like you say, hey, like come in and drywall my house, but submit me a plan for this first before you come in. And if I don't like your plan, you can go away. I'll find someone else to do it.
Yep.
All right. I didn't know that V2 worked like that. I get it now. I get it.
But the main difference is instead of the mining pool constructing the block, so you take away that centralization risk.
Yeah. I mean, in that example, I'm building a house. I tell V1, I say, all right, Neil, you're gonna drywall all of these walls, and you're gonna do it exactly how I say. But in this example, you're gonna propose me the plan, and if I agree with it, then we're off to the races.
So then in V2, I say I'm mining all transactions. I don't care which ones are censored. And I propose that to you, and I'm not saying you guys specifically. I'm just saying just arbitrarily. I propose that to a mining pool, and they say no. You still need to exclude.
You need to censor these.
Yeah, you still need to exclude.
Yeah, and
then you switch pools.
Pools.
That's not what it's protecting from. It's protecting from a mining pool, like specifically acting in bad faith, basically. And then, right, like you're preemptively stopping it instead of after the fact.
If that happens, you're going to get all side-eyed and be like, what's going on here? Why do you keep rejecting my blocks? This is bullshit. Like, are you censoring something? Yeah. And then you're just going to flip pools, and everyone else is going to do the same thing.
So then rather than me contributing my hash rate to a pool that then excludes transactions after the block has already been found, and then I have to leave. So you're just telling me straight up in the beginning.
Exactly.
No. We are excluding these transactions, and if you don't want to follow those rules, then you need to go somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that incentivizes censorship resistance, right? Because if you're a pool that's censoring some transaction and that transaction has a higher transaction fee than other transactions that are being put on a block, that's going to incentivize miners to move to a different pool, which literally de-incentivizes being a censoring pool.
All right, I get it.
And it's kind of important when it comes to regulation too, right? That this idea that the pool isn't the one constructing the block in the first place. It's kind of like their hands are clean.
Oh, so you're saying that there's less incentive for them originally to even
censor it because they're like, we're not constructing it.
Yeah. Okay.
And then, so that goes to a further question that R2 in the comments mentioned, who said he was going to go to bed about 45 minutes ago, and he's still listening. There's this pool, they're tiny, Laurentia pool, that's run by Mine Farm Buy, and they pay out the Coinbase transaction, so they don't actually custody any funds. I'm kind of curious on Jan's opinion of that, because I mean, I think they're the only pool that's actually paying out directly from Coinbase. Are you aware of this?
Yes, we're aware of this. The problem is that this approach doesn't really scale because you are taking up precious block space, and basically reducing the amount of fees, right? So if you think about it, that you have a couple of thousand miners that you're supposed to pay out, then you may not be left with any space for regular transactions. So you would essentially be mining gigantic empty blocks with a huge fan out Coinbase transaction.
So I got a question about that. So I thought about that. I've heard about this. I haven't deep dove into it at all or anything like that. But so it's completely, what's the word I'm looking for? Like it's unusable by your normal home miner because you can't pay somebody out their block reward if they're mining on an S9.
Yeah, think about it like you'd be paying out a bunch of tiny little transactions.
It's essentially
and you're basically censoring yourself because you aren't paying enough transaction fee for it to even be worth paying. Like you'd have to be huge.
Well, your whole block reward, what you get from a pool like that pays out directly from Coinbase. If you're a small miner, it's dust. The only thing you're doing is paying. Unless I'm missing something on that, like
you're not. That's the issue.
Okay. You're literally censoring yourself by not paying enough transaction fees to even like get your stuff through.
You're mining for the miners.
So
the miners, and that's it.
For the listeners that are confused, we're not talking about Coinbase, the exchange. Coinbase decided to name themselves after the Coinbase, which is the transaction where the miners pay themselves. So that has no fees for the actual transaction, but the problem is that the next transaction after that is it's done at that point.
In fact, this transaction collects the fees. So let's say the block value is 6.25 and all the fees of all the transactions are added to this output. So the block value, literally the amount being inflated, because that's the emission, right, of Bitcoin is 6.25 plus all the fees that are in the transactions that have been put into the block. So you're completely right with the dust. So it works, like technically it works. The problem is it doesn't scale and it has all these side effects. So you would have to have, I don't know, just a couple of miners, big miners, no small miners, or you would have to somehow like interleave the rewards. So not every miner would be included in a certain block, but I don't want to step into this because I'm not familiar with the exact algorithm that is being used in Laurentia pool.
Well, basically, I mean, I think Mine Farm Buy, and I don't want to speak for him, but I consider him a friend. I think that he understands that it's a major trade-off. But the concern is if they start going after, if governments start going after mining pools for being custodians, they don't have, we wouldn't really have another solution besides that.
Right, that's a valid point.
But it's definitely, if we can avoid it, then avoid it.
Well, you can't have small scale miners at that point,
right?
And then you're right back to the whole block debate, but rather than debating nodes, you're debating mining. You're gonna have to centralize mining again at that point. If that's
it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off like everything else, right? It's the difference between more centralized mining pools versus more centralized miners. Yeah. It's not the ideal. You don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah.
There's another question. It's not even really a question. It's a statement about this guy. Kjo in the comments said that, Blockware shut down the facility that his miners were hosted in. And now he's shit out of luck. I'm curious what the panelists think about this new hosted mining phenomenon. Blockware is one of the main ones who do it, and Compass is another one. What are your thoughts on that?
If I could start, I don't understand the financials of something like Compass. So you give them, I think the last numbers I saw somebody was asking me about was you give them $24,000 up front, you give them something like $6,000 a month for 6 months, and they put one miner online for you starting February of 2022.
It's definitely getting worse and worse. I mean, obviously everything's so profitable that everyone's jumping on board, and they only have so much capacity.
I'm not the type of guy that figures out.
I mean, if you were lucky enough to buy S9s at $50 a pop back in November, or join Compass
did I say S9s? I meant like S19s.
Well, what I'm getting at is, or subscribe to Compass back in November, you would get decent profits, and you'd be able to turn on a miner at that moment. But mining is so incredibly profitable right now that they don't have the capacity for it. So their miners aren't even turning on until May of next year. So yeah, it's a crapshoot. I mean,
is it some kind of weird what the hell is it called, layaway program or something, where you give them all the money up front and they go buy whatever contracts they can get? I don't get it. I can't figure out the business model.
I think their business model really broke when they ran out of capacity, because there's so much demand for miners that like you said, they're not even turning on until May of next year, which is ridiculous. Am I willing to send them that much money to turn on a miner? You're already sending them upfront payment, and then you're giving them $6,000 a month. Or don't quote me on that. I honestly can't remember exactly how much money it was. It's way more, yeah.
Yeah, but
it's just a market thing, right?
Pay them every single month, and then they don't even turn your miners. They don't even turn one miner on for you for 6 months, and then you only get one additional miner each month.
You're talking about their bundle programs.
Yeah. It seems weird to me.
Well, that's that weird package thing that they have. You can also just buy a miner, and then it'll just go on, and you pay it's like $9,000 for an S19 or whatever it is, and then it goes online on whatever time, and then you start paying monthly. But what I've kind of come to understand is that your average home user that is not technically savvy, they have maybe a laptop that they barely function with, and they know enough about it and they want to get in on it. That's a reasonable way for somebody that just doesn't know anything to operate it. That's as close as they're going to get to actually mining Bitcoin on their own and not just purchasing it outright.
Yeah.
And I've had a couple of friends do that, and he had a lot of money to throw in it and no technical abilities at all. And so mining at home, even if he had the capacity, he just doesn't know how to do it. And so he went in on Compass. But yeah, the demand is just insane. And so, but even if we just look at just a couple months ago when everything plummeted down, you could get an S19 for $6,000. It's already doubled in price.
Yeah, it's a market thing, right? The demand is so high, the capacity is low. It's just what they can provide at this point. But I mean, I could rant on this topic for a while. I think what they're doing is pretty incredible, but it looks so shitty just because they don't have the facilities that can plug these miners in yet, because it takes so much time to plug them in. But
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, you're fine. I'm just saying it's a different dynamic buying a miner today through Compass versus buying one in November. Like I said, November, Bitcoin wasn't as profitable to mine with. You could get it plugged in today, but if you buy a miner through them now, September, it's delayed because they have no place to put it. And
it's just like you used to be able to actually buy a miner directly on Bitmain's website. It's just like you could just go there and get one day, and then they ship it to you. And now they're not there anymore.
Right. And it's very enticing to have like a 6 cent per kilowatt hour. Like, I mean,
yeah.
The people that have asked me about Compass, I've told them, you probably won't go wrong ever in the near future with 6 cents per kilowatt hour, but here's your risks.
Big kahuna. I told you I was going to be ending up talking over you this whole time. If I can't see your face and I can't see your mouth moving, I told you. I want.
Neil, how many claws are you in right now?
16.
Yeah, well, there we go.
I certainly agree with you. Coin Heated is it solves the problems that most people have. It's the problems that all of us have. And that's why you and I turned to immersion heating or immersion cooling, was because there was just too much noise, too much heat. And those solutions solves that for everyone. I think we talked about that in the last Citadel Dispatch, that we were talking about introduction to
Citadel Dispatch 31.
Yeah.
I mean, my opinion is I tend to agree with Big Kuna. I mean, right now mining there's a shortage of everything. And it's super profitable to mine. So everything's kind of out of whack on Compass's side. It provided for a while there, provided a nice entry level way of getting in. But my biggest concern has always been basically like a not your keys, not your coins type of situation. But in this case, it's hardware, right? So, to me, the holy grail has always been to have your own hardware and to run it yourself and have full control over it. But I do respect the fact that, there's people that have extremely expensive power rates, and, not even especially if you're not in America. In America, we're very privileged that we tend to have very cheap power, and they don't have the skills to at least set it up in the beginning. But I think more people are overwhelmed, like unrightfully so overwhelmed, about entry-level mining. Like, it is way easier than people expect.
I agree. I 100% agree with you there. In my opinion, like, the way people should start mining, buy one S9 and just throw it down in your garage or somewhere. Like, instead of running a garage heater in the winter or something like that. Like Steve Barber, the guy that I work for at Upstream Data, literally started with two S9s in his garage, just running them during the winter. It was so hot in his garage in the middle of winter in Canada. Yep. Like, it's minus 20, minus 30 outside, and it's crazy hot in his garage. And now he's building data centers and putting them all over the US and Canada. And it's not that hard. And especially with some of the new stuff, this whole thing's about firmware, but yet another time for me to shill Brains OS, because I love the damn firmware. It's the best stuff on the market. Just they have a toolbox application. It's a GUI. It's a graphical user interface. You click buttons on it and it installs for you, and then you're done. You go into the web interface and everything is accessible through like buttons and typing stuff out. There's no terminal, there's no nothing. It's easy. And so I think everybody should do that.
I was going to ask about that. Oh, sorry to interrupt you, Matt, but I was going to ask about that. That was one of my main questions was, can you can just do brains without command line or anything now?
You don't even need command line, dude. This toolbox tool they put out, it literally looks like any other app that you're running on your computer. You just download it, you run it, and you click install, and you give it an IP address and maybe some pool information if you want, and then you just hit run. Like anything else you can find anywhere on the internet, you can find how to do pools, you can do all that stuff. It's so simple, and there's so much support out there for it now.
Nice, because last time I did it, probably about a year ago, it was the Boz toolbox was available, but it was like drag and drop into command line, and I didn't know.
It's good you got to learn.
I'll let you go here, Jonathan, but I have some stuff about this after when you get a chance to talk.
Hit it.
Oh, I forgot what I was going to say now. Somebody did just point out there is actually S19s on Bitmain's site right now. That's really interesting. But yeah, I did start off. I started this whole adventure finally.
They're pre-orders, I think. The S19s are pre-orders.
Shipping
Aren't
in 3 working days after paid.
Oh, wow.
How many days?
3.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but you got to take into account that there's no ships leaving port right now, so that's another 3 months.
That's a deep conversation.
But that was how I started out too. I had an electric heater in my garage. Looking at it one day, I'm like, it's a 100% waste product. I mean, yes, I want the heat, but it doesn't do anything else. And then I got an S9 on eBay, and they shipped it to me with no packaging at all. They just tossed it in an empty cardboard box. It got here.
They treat them like bricks. It's actually like, and dealing with thousands of these over the course of a few weeks, man, you start to understand that they're literally like crazy common. Like, and people, I've seen people like using them to like lift weights as a meme. They're funny. Like,
so they ended up refunding me because the fans were damaged, and then they didn't want it back, so I got a free S9 on top of that. And then I was using it to heat my garage. I'm like, okay, and I've been nonstop ever since. It's like,
the irony is he throws away his fans now.
And like, this is the crazy thing. Like, if you are heating any part of your house with a space heater, just put a miner there instead. If you're a pleb who wants to get into mining, dude, just put a miner in your house.
And really, the issue is the fan noise, and that's the biggest turnoff. And then 220 volts.
I guarantee you can get quieter fans, and on top of that, install Brains OS, and you can bring your fan speeds down. That makes them so much quieter. You just tune the wattage down. You get quieter fans if you're really that worried about it, and you can get a really quiet miner.
You absolutely can.
I mean, I think that's a great transition back to our, how to improve your at-home mining setup. I made a very crudely drawn drawing for Matt to share, but there's actually a threshold. Oh, there it is. It's beautiful. It's very beautiful. There's actually a threshold. Like you lower your wattage, which you can't really do in a lot of custom firmwares, or a lot of stock firmwares. You have like a low, medium, high setting, but these miners are actually more energy efficient on a lower setting. So in this ugly ass drawing that I sent, I marked an X there. If you use the S9 as reference, they are sold to mine at about 1400 watts. But if you tune them down to about 1000 watts, you get more bang for your buck at a much quieter noise level, using way less energy. Yeah. And if you're mining at home with like not the best energy rate, you're going to be mining more Bitcoin, spending less money. Your wife's happy because it's not as loud, and you're earning more. So there is like
Well, the percentage is more. Your total earnings, because your wattage goes down, your hash is less, but the percentage that you get, in that chart, that's the cost of energy versus return on Bitcoin is ideal.
Yeah,
Right.
you'll
That's
be,
why
you'll be
I
spending less.
get. Yep.
Go ahead.
I'd say, and then that's why the S17s from Brains, they come out at like 27, 28 watts, 2007, 28 watts, and they found that that's kind of the ideal. It's a bit under what they would run at stock, but that's kind of the sweet spot where you get maximum efficiency for what you're generating.
Yeah, and so no, my understanding from what I've seen from people running Brains OS, it's somewhere in the 900 to 1200 range of watts. It all depends on what your it all depends on your
Depends on the
miner. Like
miner.
every miner is completely different. You have to kind of test. But that's the nice thing about being a one miner person. Like you just throw that miner in your basement, you fiddle with it, like because that's the nice thing. This is a learning experience for a lot of people. Once you get it down there, you'll learn. I guarantee. If you go out and buy an S9 right now, put some Brains OS on it, and just play around with it, you will learn, and you'll learn really fast because it's not that difficult. And
it's not.
So really, it's about taking that first step. Like as a home miner, just take that first step. Get a miner. Get an S9, in my opinion, 100%. Just get an S9. They're easy, they're cheap, and they don't use a ton of power. And then play around with that tuning until you can get a good watts per terahash, and then you're spending less of your Bitcoin to pay for your power, and you can start to stack your sats at home.
So I had two questions before we wrap this up. I mean, the first one relates directly to what you just said, Brett. I mean, S9s have been on the network for, I believe, like 5 years now, almost, or maybe 4. How long do you guys think we'll still see S9s mining for? Because they kind of seem like the AK-47
Depends on
miner.
fuel source. I mean, if you literally have a free fuel source,
Yeah.
I think they're going to
exactly
start dying out. I think they'll live through this halving because, I mean, if we continue this trend where price runs up quicker than miners go online, but I do think that the halving will be, the shot to the heel.
Yeah.
But like you said, fuel source, right? It ultimately comes down to that.
Because it's an efficiency game, right? Like they're less efficient than the new ones, but they're cheaper entry level.
And if you're literally trying to burn off fuel already, and out in the oil fields and stuff where they're doing that, and you want to get rid of fuel to have lower emissions, you would actually want something less efficient, potentially, and cheaper, just to have something. Because your percent kilowatt, the only real cost is the generator, like the actual generator itself, and then the maintenance on it, of course. And so, like, what does that cost you? It ends up being like, what, 2 cents a kilowatt hour or something?
I should mention something too. So Upstream Data, we're developing something that we call the black box.
That was my second question.
Yeah.
Hit us with it.
What's the details?
Steve, I gotta find like a picture or Steve's Twitter post on this. But we're building this black box. It's basically just a box. You put some miners in it. It's it's not very big. Like you probably want to put like S19s or something in it because it's more efficient. But the idea of the box is to quiet down the miners, keep airflow good, and also for it to be weather resistant and to not screw your miners up. So basically the idea is you'd buy this thing, you'd buy some S19s along with it, you'd put this down in your backyard, wherever, even like inside your house if you have a spot you want to heat, and then literally just get an electrician to plug it in for you, and then you can start home mining that way too. Hook it up to internet. And
I'm working on
cool
basically that same thing, but in the oil version. So they got the air version, and I talked to Steve about this too. We may work together possibly on an immersion one. I don't know, but I got other immersion stuff going on. So, but yeah, having that smaller smaller setup that you can do at home, it's a good way to go.
I'm trying to find this video because I have there's a really good video that Steve put up on Twitter of just how much quieter it makes this thing.
And the whole idea is that you can put it outside too, right? Is like that it not only is it quieter, but you can just keep it outside on your porch or something.
Yeah, because you don't want it inside in the winter, but if you wanted to, then you could bring it inside.
You could put the noise outside. Oh, that whole unit. Oh, I haven't.
The whole thing.
They have a box.
I haven't seen that. That's cool.
This is what I want to see more of. I want to see more of this innovation that enables home miners, because then we really have distributed hash.
You guys got a nice picture of me putting the S19 in the box. That's an earlier prototype of the thing. It's actually the new one we have is black. I sent to you guys in the chat if you want to put it in here. But the newest version, there's a video up on Twitter of us like opening and closing this box with S19s in it. I think it drops at like 15 decibels or something stupid. It's crazy. And decibels are like every 10 decibels is like 10 times as loud or something. I can't quite remember how it works, but it's something similar to that. It's a weird exponential scale or something, but it's actually quite a bit quieter. Like it's very, very loud.
Ty's asking in the chat, if you're starting from zero, is there a downside to buying a few hundred S9s versus a few dozen, he says, micro BTs or Bitmain miners? So is there a downside to S9s compared, hundreds of S9s compared to dozens of new generation?
Yes.
There's severe power limit or power issues with that.
Okay. Look, the easiest way to do it is buy one S9, put it in your basement, get started. Once you have that under your belt, like it depends on what kind of power you're running, depends what you're doing, what your plan is. But if you have expensive power, run new gen miners, but do it after you get a good understanding of the miners. Don't go out and buy a $15,000 S19 before you get an S9 and understand how mining works, because it's going to make it difficult for you.
Agreed.
Yeah,
I think.
I'm going to pull up the sound test of the black box.
Are we gonna get you fired, Brad? Are you revealing information you shouldn't be?
No, this is all over Twitter, man.
Yeah, no, I co-sign that. Oh, now
oh my god!
And so you can hear there's a huge difference there. Like it's ridiculous just how loud that thing actually is inside there.
Any heating issues?
Clint Forrester said in the chat, every 3 decibels doubles the volume. So we were at 15, so 2 to the 5 is how much quieter that thing is.
When this feed started, before we went live, I had just one miner running in the basement at the place I was at, and it sounded like that over the live feed. I'm pretty sure like 3 guys in here had to go shut their miners off just now.
Yeah, it gets pretty loud. Like people, I understand that this is definitely a big turnoff for a lot of people looking to get into mining. Like you put that thing like even outside, I know people that like their neighbors are just like, turn that off. It's too loud. Like, and I totally understand that. And obviously your wife's not going to be amused and your kids might not be amused if you have kids, that kind of stuff. But the idea of this black box is to make it more accessible for everybody, so that once you, like, again, I'd still recommend buy an S9 and play with it a little bit before you do something like that. That's a little bigger scale. But it's designed to make it a little more accessible to people who don't want to go out and buy a big commercial setup or something like that, but want to be able to mine at home and start getting their own KYC free Bitcoin, right?
The one thing that I think a lot of people misunderstand is, actual power draw. One thing I'm learning about is if you look at the standard plug in the United States, it's a 110 outlet. But if you look at the rest of the world, like Europe, their standard plug is a 220 or 230 outlet, and that kind of baffled me.
Yep. You need an electrician to basically wire these S19s in because they need that much power.
Right, and the S9 is a very old hardware, but it was designed in China where 240 is the standard. So you can run an S9 on a 110 power, but you have to underclock it.
You want a solution for that? You need the APW3++ switching power supply. They run on 110 volt, but on a higher amperage. Because volts times amps is equal to your watts. So if you have the right amount of amperage running through 110, I might be absolutely confusing myself here. Either way, watts times amp or volts times amps is equal to watts. So as long as you have the right voltage and amperage running into that switching power supply, the APW3++, you're fine. You can mine on pretty much anything.
I might have to talk to you about this a little bit because
consider amps and watts the same. Like for that conversion, it's like 2.3 by 1 or something like that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I just can't remember if wallets or watts or volt or
yeah. But miners actually consume so little actual electricity to do the work that they do that everything that they take in as amps they put out as watts. So it's almost a 1-for-1, but the conversion of amps to watts is like 2.3 to 1 or something like that, because everything is expelled as heat.
I guess what I'm getting at is like you do need to be careful plugging in the S9s into 110 outlets. Like if you scale them down, they're fine, but they are meant to be ran off of a 240 volt. And a lot of people kind of trick themselves up on that. They either pop breakers or damage the miner or damage or just try to understand that.
Don't do this yourself. Get an electrician. Like, trust me when I say this. This is easy for an electrician, but it's complicated for most people.
And electricians aren't that expensive, so just don't fuck around.
Yeah, right. Don't burn your house down. We are not suggesting that. Please do not.
Especially new generation miners, because those are 220 volt. No, that'll kill you.
Yeah, and people think they can buy those and just plug them in their standard wall, but you need to, if you're in the US, unplug your dryer, right? Unplug
what do you mean I don't need an oven?
Yeah. There's a beautiful meme. If I just unplug the dryer, I can plug in another S9.
Well, that's what the Airbnb miners have to do.
Yeah.
And see, an electrician will just come in, wire two 110 volt breakers together, and give you 220. Like they'll just.
And it's very cheap. It's cheap and it's quick. Just get a licensed electrician.
Yeah.
Guys, we're nearing the 2.5 hour point. This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. I thank you all for joining. I hope to have you all back on at some point. I figure we should wrap it up with some final thoughts.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, of course, Neil.
Thank you. Secret Sats.
Secret Sats. First of all, I own the domain name, but it's a horrible name.
Are you shitting me?
Yeah, because you guys kept chirping at me about Secret Sats, so I bought the domain name, but I don't really like it.
I wasn't chirping at you. It was fucking the Australian chick.
Well, I own the domain name, but I don't really think it's a good meme.
I told her I was going to say it. I had to say it. That's all I got to say.
Okay, so we started the final thoughts with Neil. Big Kahuna, final thoughts.
Oh man, I feel like I'm on the spot.
You are.
I am. If you guys ever want to talk to me, I mean, you can find me on Telegram or Twitter. I love talking about this shit. So if you have any questions, obviously I work for Brains, so I'm incentivized to kind of help out with that stuff. This has been fun. I'm very excited to get to talk with all you guys and hopefully be on more podcasts in the future.
Jonathan, Coin Heated, final thoughts. Thank you, Big Kahuna.
So I guess the biggest thing is, I'm really just excited to try and bring in more home mining stuff to people, because I really see that expanding out more and more instead of consolidating into the mega data centers in single points of failure, or if if Compass goes offline tomorrow and they go bankrupt, what happens to everything? And having it at home, you own it, it's yours. So that's what I'm working towards. And I'm on Twitter and Telegram at CoinHeated. Always feel free to hit me up.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Jan, final thoughts.
If you're a miner, you may want to talk to your local manufacturer of the mining machines and trying to convince them that you are the valuable customer and that you want to own the actual machine, which implies no secure boots and full control of the machine. You want to put any firmware that you want on it. If the miners, I mean, I'm partially explaining it as a joke, but I mean it seriously, that the trend that we're seeing in how the manufacturers are treating the customers is pretty much a result of, let's say, a duopoly currently. And we should have more players in the game soon, so that new standards are going to be set.
100%. Thank you, Jan. Brett, final thoughts.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I definitely want to shout out Mr. Steve.
Love you, freaks. Thanks again for joining, as always. I'll see you for Rabbit Hole Recap on Thursday. I'll see you for another Citadel Dispatch on next Bitcoin Tuesday. Little hat update. We got a freak who does embroidery for a living. He's sending me 50 dispatch hats. So if you're on the wait list, if you've been patiently waiting for me to actually ship you some quality dispatch merch, you should be getting it hopefully within the next few weeks. Reminder, you can also buy merch from BTC Pins and Quinn Solo at citadeldispatch.com/stack. Help support the show. I do appreciate it, as always. Love you all. Stay humble and stack.